Properties of parallel lines. Objectives. To prove theorems about parallel lines and to use properties of parallel lines to find angle measures. Corresponding angles. Corresponding angle theorem says that if the transversal intersects two parallel lines, then the corresponding angles are congruent. Now this is only true of parallel lines. In the last section in 3.1, you can have corresponding angles without having them congruent. It only happens if the lines are parallel, that they happen to be congruent. So I want you to make the distinction, because when you go to take a test on this, section 3.1 and here on out will all be thrown together, and so just because it's a corresponding angle does not mean it's congruent. It's only congruent if the two lines are parallel. Okay, so using the diagram, it says what angle pairs are congruent. Well, if it's corresponding angles, we know it's going to be angle 1 and angle 5. So instead of saying congruent, we can use the congruent symbol. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. Angle 4 would be congruent to angle 8. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. And angle 3 would be congruent to angle 7. Now guys, you're going to be using this idea most of the rest of this, not just this chapter obviously, but the rest of the year, because if they give you parallel lines, they're going to expect you to make connections to what you know about the angle pairs. So make sure you put this to memory. It won't go away. Example 1 says, if you know that the measure of one angle, can you always find the measure of all 8 angles when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal? Explain. Okay, well let's start off with, we just had the theorem that said that corresponding angles are congruent. So that means I know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. We agree on that. Okay, now from chapter 2, I know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3 because of vertical angles. Now I want to see the word vertical angles in your explanation. I am not writing this out because I want to make sure that you are listening. So angle 5 is congruent to angle 7 because of vertical angles. Well, because of corresponding angles, we know that angle 2 would be congruent to angle 6, but before even that, I know that, well, 2 would be, let me go with this. 2 is congruent to angle 6 because of corresponding angles. Angle 2 has to be congruent to angle 4 because they're vertical angles. Let me do 2 marks here. And angles 6 and 8 have to be congruent because of vertical angles. So if you know the measure of one of the angles, you can find the measure of all 8 angles when two lines are parallel. So another thing you could draw from this is if you have two lines parallel that are cut by a transversal, you only have 2 different angle measures. Same side interior angles. Okay, now we said before that angle 1 was congruent to angle 5, and angle 1 was congruent to angle 3 because of vertical angles, and 5 and 7 are congruent because of vertical angles. We also said that we knew angle 2 was congruent to angle 6 by corresponding angles, and we know 2 and 4 are congruent to each other because of vertical angles, and 4 and 8 we can say they're congruent by either 4 and 8 by corresponding or 8 and 6 by vertical. Okay, but now it says same side interior angles. If a transversal intersects two parallel lines, then the same side interior angles are supplementary. Well, this is obviously true because if we look at our same side interior angles, that's these guys. Notice how if we look at angle 1 and 2, they form a straight line, and we know that they're supplementary. So a red angle and a blue angle come together to make a straight line, so that's 180 degrees. Well, these same side interior angles have a red and a blue. So that means they have to be supplementary. So we can say that angle 3 and angle 6 are supplementary, and angle 4 and angle 5 are also supplementary. Alternate interior angles. Alternate interior angles would be our 4 and 6 and 3 and 5. Now if you look at the figure that you have on the front page, because you should have marked this up a little bit, we know that 4 and 6 are congruent to each other, And we also know that angle 3 is congruent to angle 5 because those were the two angle measures that we have. Now this does not mean that 3 and 6 are congruent. The only time 3 and 6 would be congruent is if we have perpendicular lines. Okay, proof. It says, prove the theorem 3.1 that alternate interior angle theorems. Basically saying that if you have two lines cut by a transverse, if you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal, then the alternate interior angles are congruent. Okay, so statements, reasons. We always start off with our given, so I'm going to say that L is parallel to M. That was given. Okay, now the next thing I want to start off with is that angle. Now we can use other theorems to help prove this. So I can say that angle 3 and angle 6 are supplementary. Oops, sorry. And this is because same side interior angles cut by a transversal are supplementary. So same side interior angles of parallel lines congruent, or sorry, not congruent, silly me, are supplementary. Okay, then I can say that angle 3 and angle 4 are a linear pair and supplementary. Now, the textbook or Math Excel might separate those into two separate things. Like they might say that statement 3 is 3 and 4 are a linear pair, and then step 4 would be that 3 and 4 are supplementary. I'm putting them all together because it's not a horrible ordeal. And this is by the definition of a linear pair. Okay. Now, I can say that angle 3 plus angle 6 equals 180. And I can also say that angle 3 plus angle 4 equals 180. And this is by the definition of supplementary. Okay. Now, if they are both set equal to 180, I can now say that angle 3 plus angle 6 is equal to angle 3 plus angle 4. And this is going to be by substitution. Okay. Now, I can subtract angle 3 from both sides and say that angle 6 is equal to angle 4. And this is by the subtraction property of equality. And then last but not least, I can say, running out of room, angle 6 is congruent to angle 4 by the definition of congruence. Example 2. It says prove, and it should say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 7. Okay, so we want to start off by saying statements, reasons. We'll do this in red. I just want to make sure I have enough room. That's why I'm putting it all up here like this. A is parallel to B. That was given. Okay, now if I know that A is parallel to B, I also know that my corresponding angles here have to be congruent. So I can say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 5 because corresponding angles of parallel lines are congruent. Okay, so now I know 1 and 5 are congruent to each other. Then I can say that, number 3. I also know that angle 5 is congruent to angle 7 because of vertical angles. So angle 5 is congruent to angle 7 by vertical angles. And then I can say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 7 by the transitive property. Or you could say substitution. Either one would be a valid conclusion. Alternate exterior angles. It says alternate exterior angle theorem says if a transversal intersects two parallel lines, then the alternate exterior angles are congruent. So we want alternating and their exterior, so that would be angle 1 and angle 7. So that means that angle 1 is congruent to angle 7, and also that angle 2 is congruent to angle 8. Okay, example 3. We're going to come up with all these different angle measures. On this one, they're giving us that this angle right here is 105. So now we need to find the other angle measures. Now notice they're telling me that this line is parallel to this line, and this line P is parallel to line Q. And the reason we know that is because of these markings right here. That indicates if they're there that they're parallel. Okay, so I know right now, even without knowing anything about parallel lines, I know that angle 7 has to be 105 by vertical angles. So I'm going to say 105 vertical angles. Okay, now if I know angle 7 is 105 and I have parallel lines, I know that angle 3 also has to be 105 because they're corresponding, but they didn't ask me for 3. But they did ask me for 5, and so that means I also know that angle 5 is 105 by vertical angles with angle 3 or corresponding with the original given angle. Okay, let's see. I also know that angle 5 is congruent to angle 8 by alternate interior angles. So this is 105. And I know 8 is congruent to angle 6 by corresponding angles, so 105. And now they want angles 1 and 2. Now I know angle 1 and 2 have to be congruent to each other, but they also are supplementary. Angle 2 and 5 here are supplementary to each other, so if 5 is 105, that makes angle 2 175. And that means angle 1 by vertical angles is also 75. Now, I want you to go back, re-listen to this, and write the reasons how you know all those angles measures. So you'd say either corresponding vertical angles, etc. Example 4. It says, in the figure at the right, what are the values of x and y? It says, what are the measures of the 4 angles in the figure? Well, we have our parallel lines right here, and it's cut by this transversal. So I know that this angle and this angle, they're same side interior angles, so that means that they're supplementary to each other. So I can set up to solve for x. 2x plus x minus 12 equals 180. I'm going to combine like terms, so I have 3x minus 12 equals 180. I'm going to add 12 to both sides, and I get 3x equals 192. I'm going to divide both sides by 3, and I get x equals 64. Okay, now knowing that x is 64, I'm going to plug this back in and take 2 times 64 makes this angle 128. And then I'm going to take 64 minus 12, and I'm going to get 52. Okay, now we need to solve for y. Again, the lines are parallel, and now this is my transversal, so they're still same side interior angles. So I can say 3y plus y plus 20 equals 180, because same side interior angles are supplementary. So now I have 4y plus 20 equals 180. I'm going to subtract 20 from both sides, and I have 4y equals 160. And I'm going to divide both sides by 4. And I get y equals 40. Okay, now that I know that y equals 40, I'm going to plug this in, and I'm going to have 3 times 40, which is 120. And then over here, I'm going to have 40 plus 20 gives me 60. Lesson check. Make sure that you've answered all 6 questions prior to coming to class. We'll use Pear Deck to answer these questions in class to make sure that you have the correct answers, or change the answers as needed. Either way, you still need to have these done to make that go faster.